I'm Walter Bosley, author of the Empire of the Wheel trilogy. This excerpt is from Empire of the Wheel Volume 1, an investigation of occult espionage and murder, co-authored with Richard B. Spence. Prologue. Her face hit the water. She did not gently submerge. There was nothing gentle about it. It was well into autumn, and the water was cold. Her body, though clothed, was ill-protected from the shock of chill convulsing through her limbs. A whumping sound in her ears had preceded the muffled near silence of the depths of the dark and murky lake, black as starless midnight. She might have felt the debris and other organic minutiae against her exposed skin, but she panicked. Clips of grass, grains of soil, the excrement of fish and fowl, any number of things, tossed or washed into the lake, enveloped her body. In her desperate reflex to capture oxygen into her lungs, such refuse passed into her open mouth and filled her throat, some of it catching between her teeth. Disgust was secondary to the terror of drowning. She tried holding her breath, but the initial gulp of the cold water forced a retching cough. She gasped. Frantic physical motion used even more of the oxygen in her blood, creating the need for replenishment. Breathing is more associated with the amount of carbon dioxide in the system and less to oxygen. The longer she did not breathe, the stronger her body's reflex to breathe. Holding one's breath decreases the oxygen as it is used up by the blood cells, which in turn produce more carbon dioxide. As the carbon dioxide level rose in the woman's blood, it became increasingly difficult for her to even try holding her breath. It would soon be impossible. To make matters worse, pains stabbed inside her stomach, the result of ingested poison. She felt other pain, unlike the stabbing extreme of discomfort in her stomach. The pain in her leg was external and less severe than the agonizing warfare waging in her gut. The water took advantage of these circumstances. It had captured her as surely as she had been swallowed into the maw of some giant creature. The woman could tell her hair was coming loose from the neat setting she had spent so much time on that morning. There was no reason for her to notice this now, but her mind was unraveling. In panic, she kept her eyelids wide open, though she could see nothing in the darkness. She could feel the uncomfortable sensation of water on her corneas. The water was bitter due to the amount of natural filth in its constitution. She was losing to the shock any remaining shred of control over her mind. Her gut tightened. A sharp pressure twisted just below her ribs. The effect of the poison in her stomach had overpowered her ability to deal with drowning. Every piercing jab of pain caused her to spasm in desperate agony. She could no longer control the involuntary need to breathe. Again, she gulped the gritty lake water into her throat and lungs. She gagged and could not help but gulp again. More water flowed down her esophagus, into her lungs and stomach, where the poison began to foam up. The poison had invaded her bloodstream. Swelling of her spleen caused the intense knife-like pressure in her abdomen. Cold water washed away the excessive secretion of sweat caused by the toxin in her blood. Her throat was also swollen. She felt the first throbs of pain in her neck as her lymph nodes reacted to the alien chemicals. As if the water filling her lungs wasn't enough, the poison caused hyperkeratosis, which resulted in her skin cells absorbing even more water. The chaos in her system was exacerbated by the conflicting forces of the cold of the water and the heat generated by the burning effect of the poison. The cold should have caused constriction in the vascular system, but the toxin was forcing dilation. The resultant reduction of the stroke volume of the blood through her ventricles took the fight out of her. Her blood pressure decreased rapidly. She was losing the natural resistance to fight for her life. As her brain lost what little oxygen had been stored before she hit the water, the woman became drowsy. Thoughts unrelated to the catastrophe at hand appeared at the forefront of her consciousness. Random images from her life played out in the theater of her memory. With her body's ability to fight slipping away like sand in the wind, the woman's mind snapped into madness. She could not, in the darkest extremities of her imagination, have accurately anticipated how horrifying it actually is to drown. This was no gentle drift into slumber. There was no peace. In spite of the increasing surrender of her limbs and flesh, her mind was spinning with anguish and trepidation, unlike she had never known on her very worst day. This was a hideous manner in which to depart the world, made all the more so by the relentless will of the poison in her bloodstream. Her oxygen-deprived brain finally ceased its proper function. Her heart stopped. The fight was over. Her body was finally still, drifting in the cold, dark water. She was merely another element of refuse abandoned in the murk. Her body floated just beneath the surface in the lonely south end of the lake. Fish glided past her corpse with no regard. Geese sailed by on the surface. Frogs croaked from the grassy marshes. Insects flitted about and birds whistled songs. The boats moored in their livery gently bumped one another as the city slept. This was just another autumn night in a San Bernardino valley, now known only in a few photographs. The healing waters of the lake created by the mystical springs had claimed its next victim. Despite how many had reportedly been healed or even cured, the occasional few found themselves betrayed by the life-giving reputation of these waters. The objectivity of nature is such that water itself does not care whether it heals or kills. It simply is what it is. Up on the mountain where the healing springs flowed, the giant arrowhead played mute witness to the shadow wandering the valley, as it had done so for an unknown number of centuries. What you have here is a book of questions. There are very little definitive answers, for the questions arise from events of over 100 years ago. If these questions were asked at that time, there remains no record of it, much less the answers. Thus we must ask them now and try to consider the possible solutions, of which there is more than one. Therefore, as you read, know that we consider the mere asking of the questions we present to be the first purpose of this book. Attempting to answer them is a luxury, though we try our best. You will likely feel overwhelmed at times with the known facts and the threads we pull from them, but so do we. This is not a closed case, not by a long shot. It wasn't even considered a single case at the time. There was no perpetrator who was eventually arrested, no responsible party who explained it all afterward to make our job easier. What you will read here is what there is, and what we could infer from it. This is a mystery that has lain dormant and forgotten for over 100 years as of this writing. No material evidence remains, only the questions. So let's ask them. Empire of the Wheel, an investigation of occult espionage and murder by Walter Bosley and Richard B. Spence, is available print on demand only at lulu.com.